This is a session that I put together a few years ago because I was doing a workshop. This is really kind of embarrassing. I was doing a workshop saying to teachers, we need to have a mentoring mindset. A mentoring mindset. And they were kind of staring at me, and after a while I said, did I say something wrong? And they're like, so mentoring. Yes, we need to have a mentoring mindset. And I just asked a few more questions and realized that when they thought of mentoring, they thought of having to disciple somebody for an hour every single week for the rest of their life. And I'm telling them, disciple every student you have for 1 hour. I mean, they would just say, we feel completely overwhelmed. And I thought, but what if you could have a mentoring mindset to invest in students relationally, and if you could do that in as little as 10 minutes or even 10 seconds, would that make a difference in how you form relationships with students? And they all agreed that it would. So that's what I'd like to share in the time that we have together. But to begin, I'd like to go back to an experience I had in South Africa many, many years ago. I was meeting somebody from the Zulu tribe, and he said, Sobona. And I greeted, and we talked for a little bit. Then I asked my host, what is that word, Sobona? What does that mean? He said, well, it's the Zulu greeting for hello. And I said, but I'm a word geek. I want to know what the meaning of the word is. He said, literally, it means I see you. I see you. And I thought, that is so cool. You are not invisible. You matter. I take you into account. I notice you as a person. I thought, that is such a good greeting. That is better than the American greeting. What's up? What's up means that your value is what you are doing. Whereas Sobona means your value is who you are. And it's that concept that I think is at the heart of something that you heard from those children just now. Everybody in the Summit community gets well versed in this. And it's the DNA double helix of influence. One strand is truth. The other strand is relationship. Both are necessary because truth without relationship causes people to be arrogant. Relationship without truth causes people to be apathetic. Truth without relationship is, I know the answer, I'm smarter than you, therefore I don't have to relate to you. This person says, can't we all just get along? Why talk about truth? As if truth is somehow irrelevant. So the goal in Summit Ministries is that everything we do, our job is to put rungs in the ladder between truth and relationship for somebody every day. We feel like that's what we're doing in the time we have now. That's why so many of our staff members are here interacting with you and chatting with you and answering questions and talking with you, because it's not just about what's on camera, it's about the relationship that we are developing. And it turns out that relationship is a big part of the answer to the fleeing away from church that we see so prevalent among young adults today. In fact, a group called the Barna Research Group did a study of millennials, and they found that those who stayed involved in church were twice as likely to have a close personal friendship with an adult inside the church. Those who had an intentional mentor at church were 2.5 times as likely to stay active as those who did not. Why is this the case? Because God's truth is relational. In fact, the Christian worldview teaches that God is one God, 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We might even say it this way: relationship is not just something that God does. Relationship is something that God is by His very nature. So how do we become more relational? I'd like to point out 2 different things that have been helpful to me and I hope will be helpful to you. The first one is conversation. Just conversation. For some people, they're saying right now, wait a second, that is easy for me. Conversation is easy. And there are some people for whom conversation is easy. You could strike up a conversation with anyone. But I've also met a lot of people who say that conversation is easy, and what they mean is talking is easy. If I'm with someone else, I can talk at them all day. That's not what I'm referring to. That's not conversation. But there are other people who say, I just find it really hard by the time I ask, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you think of the weather? I'm kind of out of topics. So what do I do? How do I carry on good conversations that build relationships? Many years ago, I learned 5 conversation-altering words. Here they are. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. In virtually any situation, if somebody says something, I can respond with that. So for instance, I remember meeting one of our students at Summit Ministries. Many of them, when they get here on the first day, they're kind of shell-shocked. They're in Colorado. They probably rode on an airplane. It's a little disorienting. They were up really early in the morning. We're having dinner together. And some of them find it difficult at first to get their footing conversationally. That lasts never more than 12 hours, right? I mean, then they're all talking all the time, which is really fun. But I was talking to the student. Where are you from? Iowa. Really? Where are you from in Iowa? Sioux Center. I said, tell me more about that. He said, what do you want to know? I mean, nobody's ever heard of Sioux Center. Nobody ever wants to go to Sioux Center. I said, I've heard of Sioux Center. I've been to Sioux Center. I said, it's an assault on the senses. Anybody who's from there knows exactly what I mean. And he laughed, and I said, well, but I want to know what life is like there. And he said, well, what do you want to know? Well, what sports do you play? What kinds of things do you find yourself interested in? What kinds of things would you like to try if you had a chance to go someplace else? Where would you like to go? And with each answer, just saying, hey, I'm curious about that. Why did you put it that way? Or tell me more. And that allowed us to build the relationship. This can apply to anything. I want to ask people about themselves. What would you say are your gifts and abilities? What are some things you found yourself to be really good at? What are some things that you would like to try? What are some of the activities that you're involved in? What are some of the activities that you have thought sound interesting? If you could have an influence on a group of people, who would those people be? Those are the sorts of questions. Then I'm going to ask questions about their interests. Do you have any hobbies? What is it about those hobbies you really like? You see, once you start off with those 5 conversation-altering words, then a lot of other things begin to change. I'll tell you a quick story about this, how I learned this. I was teaching a Sunday school class. Back in the day, I was a professor in Tennessee, and I taught a Sunday school class on worldview issues. I had a guy come to my class. His name was Doc. He wasn't a doctor, but it doesn't matter. In Tennessee, you can name your kid Doc, and he might never graduate from 8th grade, but he gets to be called Doc for the rest of his life. That's just how it works. So Doc, it wasn't a medical doctor. It was a surveyor, and incredibly smart guy, but he did not want to interact. So he would come to my class, sit in the back row with this posture of nonverbal disinterest. And I was kind of intimidated by it, but I never had to talk to him because there were lots of other people in the class. Well, one day I walked in to set up for the class, and Doc was there in the back row, legs crossed, looking at me like he was daring me to teach him anything. And he was the only guy in the room at that moment. I had to talk to him. So I said, Doc, tell me what you do for fun. Without ever changing his expression, he said to me, I'm building an airplane. I dropped everything I was working on. I said, you are building an airplane? Yep. Tell me more about that. Well, what do you want to know? Well, where do you build an airplane? In my garage. I said, how do you build an airplane? Is it like a huge Lego set? So we talked about this for a long time. And he sat there, never changed his facial expression. He said to me, you want to see it? Of course I want to see it. So I went over to his house. He had told me in not quite exactly the way it was. He didn't just have it in his garage. He had built a separate little building, walls lined with shelves. On the shelves, little bins of all the different parts, all bar-coded, so he knew exactly what part to put where, and in the middle was the frame of an airplane. I said, well, tell me about this. Well, this is how it works, and you push this pedal here, and this wire does this, and this flat. I said, wait a second, it's run by wires? He said, yep. I said, well, that doesn't look very safe. He said, well, that's how all the airplanes run, even the jets that you fly on. I'm like, this is life-changing for me. I'm going to ride in a bus for the rest of my life. But seriously, it was so much fun. Well, so if you do this, what does this do? If you do this, what does this do? For an hour, we talked about the airplane. And Doc got excited. He said, "So when I'm done, you want to fly with me?" "No, sir, I do not. But I've really enjoyed the tour." And forever after, we had something to talk about because I cared about the things that were important to Doc. He knew that I cared about him. And it wasn't just a floating level of interest, but we had gone pretty deep and talked about a lot of things. It allowed us to have some great conversations from that point forward. So conversation is the first skill. The second skill is coaching. Coaching is a little bit different than dialogue or conversation. Coaching assumes that you're working with a person who wants to grow. That's most people. Most people don't want to stay stuck. If they do want to stay stuck, it's probably because they have some kind of an unresolved fear. So you help through conversation for them to overcome that. And then when you begin asking questions like, what would you like to try? And you get some answers to those questions. Or you're saying to a student, I really think, you may not see this in yourself, that you have leadership skill, and I'd like to see you run for student government. Well, I don't know how I would do that. Well, would you like for me to help you? I can't campaign for you, can't advocate for you, but I can sure help you learn to put together a good speech for your speech to the student body. I can help you look how to make campaign posters. I can help you talk through how to meet your classmates and ask them for their vote, or whatever it happens to be. Okay, that's just a random example. But coaching is when somebody else wants to grow and you are willing to walk alongside them to help them grow. You get 4 times the results. Several years ago, a buddy of mine and I started a coaching company because we had noticed that we would go into companies and help them solve communication problems. We would analyze the company, we would survey people, then we would bring them all the results and say, if you do these things, this will help you solve the problem that you have. Most of the time, they pay us and then put the report on the shelf. They didn't follow through. And on the one hand, it wasn't my problem because I got paid. But on the other hand, it was frustrating to think that we had put in all of this work, they had put in all of this work, the employees were hopeful, and nobody was going to do anything with the results. So we learned something along the way, that if we would meet with them once a week for 6 or 8 weeks following our time together, that they would be 4 times as likely to implement the suggestions and bring about the change in the organization. That's the idea of coaching. It's not coaching as in, boy, this is a basketball, and here's what you need to do next. It's not like that. Coaching is walking alongside the other person to help them grow, and then you grow in the process. The heart of coaching is really 3 things. First of all is listening, because listening enables us to grasp what the other person's saying and demonstrate that our concern is with them. So you know that you're listening well when your first instinct is not to say, okay, let me tell you what you should do. Or, oh, I had that problem before, let me tell you what I did. Because you don't know that your problem is anything like their problem. The first instinct needs to be to listen. The second thing, and this helps you with listening, and this is what Greg Koch will be sharing with you a little bit more in a few minutes, is asking powerful questions. How do you ask good questions? Powerful questions would be things that deepen the conversation, not inquisitive kinds of questions, not the sort of questions like somebody, I don't feel very well. Have you thought about seeing a doctor? That's not a question, is it? That's a command. If you haven't thought about this, you're not really as bright as you look, right? That's not the sort of question we're talking about. Open-ended questions that allow the other person to set goals and to grow. And then third is goal setting, helping the other person set worthy goals. Let me give you an illustration I think you'll relate to as teachers. This came from an experience I had many years ago doing an in-person faculty professional development workshop on mentoring and communication skill. I wanted to teach coaching skills to them, and I thought, probably the best way to teach the skills is to demonstrate. So I asked, there are 100-some teachers out there, I asked them, does anybody here have a problem that they would like to solve or a goal they would like to set? And you'd be willing to come up on stage and talk with me about it? Lady raised her hand. I called her up on stage. Since that time, I have learned that you always want to try to find out what the problem is before you invite them on stage in front of all of their colleagues. Hard-won lesson. So I asked her, what's the issue that you are having or the problem you would like to solve? And she said to me, I recently had surgery, and I cannot get past 1 o'clock in the afternoon without being overcome by pain and resenting the fact that I'm teaching. Oh, wow. Okay, I understand that. I said, so let me ask you a question. If you were to be, let's say we were 3 months down the road, and in these 3 months I called you, and I asked you, is that problem better? And you said yes. What would you have to say to make that happen? And she said to me, I would have to be able to get past 1 o'clock in the afternoon without being overcome by pain. Okay, great. So where are you now? What is the reality of the situation? I was just going through I had a little list of questions on my mind. I'll share them with you in a minute. She just looked at me like I was a little bit crazy, and she said, I can't get past 1 o'clock in the afternoon without being overcome by pain. And I was thinking, I just want to die, because I could feel the sweat in my armpits, and I could feel all of the people looking at me as if to say, okay, smart guy, you got her up on stage, you better fix her problem. Well, she had said the same thing 3 times, and I was listening. And so I asked her, what happens at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? Because you said it 3 times. You can't get past 1 o'clock in the afternoon without being overcome by pain. What happens at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? And she, without hesitation, said to me, freshman Spanish. So I asked her, tell me more about that. She said, there are 3 boys in that class that make it miserable. They do not want to learn Spanish. They cut up the whole time. I spend all of my time trying to keep them from making fun of the process or making fun of the other students. And by the time we finish the class, I am so stressed out that I feel overcome with pain, and I don't even want to be a teacher anymore. So I asked her, what would you like to have happen? And she said, I would be willing to make some changes to whatever I need to do to get back to the place where I really love teaching. So we started talking through these questions. In fact, one of the questions I asked her was, what are some of your options? What do you think you could do? And she was so frustrated by this point. She said, well, I don't know what to do. That's why I came up here, so you could coach me and tell me what to do. I said, but I don't know you. I might have some solutions, but I don't know if they would work for you. Why don't you see if you can come up with one? She said, I can't come up with one. I said, well, how about if you came up with 5? Because sometimes I've learned that it's easier to think of 5 things than it is to think of one thing, because you're not trying to edit. She said, I can't think of 5 things. Now keep in mind, there are 100-some of her colleagues sitting there watching this whole debacle. In desperation, I said to her, I know you can't think of 5 things, but if you could think of 5 things, what would they be? Incredibly, she said, okay, I'll think of them. And she listed out her 5 options. One of them was, I want to talk to the freshman boys' coach to see how I might better deal with these boys. So I asked her of the 5, which one would you like to focus on? She said that one, I want to talk to the coach. So I asked her, okay, will you do that? Yes, I will. When will you do it? Probably on Monday. Well, how do you know that you will do it on Monday? How do you even know the coach wants to talk to you? She turned like this and said, hey, coach. I said, wait a second, he's here? And she said, he's right over there. I looked over at him and I said, coach, will you help her? And just sitting there like this, he said, yes, I will. I could tell by the way he said it that if those 3 freshman boys lived through the weekend, this problem would be solved. And you know exactly how it is, right? The coach says, boys, your freshman Spanish teacher is my good friend. And when she's under stress, I get stressed. And when I get stressed, I make people run laps. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm going to be talking to your freshman Spanish teacher every day. And if she is less than happy, you boys will run off my stress. Right? That's how it's going to happen. Clearly solve the problem. What were the questions I was asking? Because I remember I said you got to be asking powerful questions. So I put together this. This is not new with me. You could probably find this 6 billion places on the internet. But GROW helps me remember the questions I want to ask. G would be a goal question. What would you like to work on? In that situation, I asked her if we were to talk in 3 months and you were to say it changed, what would have to happen? Sometimes that's easier. If you say to somebody, what is your goal? A lot of people don't speak that way. They don't think that way. But if you ask them, in the future, imagine that this was better, tell me what that would look like, they can answer that question. R stands for reality. Where are you now? I want to know where you would like to go, but I want to know what the current situation is. And you'll get a lot of insights in talking through those two things. Third question is options. What are some of the possible solutions? Once again, I might have some ideas, but the chances are the person already knows what they could do, and you want to encourage them to think things through. If every time you are the one who comes up with solutions, what will the person do next time they need help? They won't think it through for themselves. They'll come to you. They want to hear from you only. All right, so that's options. Finally is will. What will you commit to do, and how will you measure your success? So GROW, goal, reality, options, and will. Here's what I have found. Since the time that I had that demonstration with the teacher, I learned, always ask for 2 or 3 people, and then pick the one that you think would make the most sense to everybody else who's in the group. I bring them up in front. And I've done this here at Summit with some of our summer staff, so you've seen how this works. There are several things that happen. Number one, we always arrive at a solution, 100% of the time. Because you're not trying to solve everything forever, you're just trying to figure out what is the next step. Second thing that always happens is the person solves the problem in less than 10 minutes. Now, you could talk about it a little bit longer if you wanted to, but you can arrive at what the next reasonable step should be inside of 10 minutes. And then third, and this is the most important thing, when the person always comes up with a solution that I would never have thought of. I like to think I'm a pretty smart guy. I've run a lot of different kinds of things. But every time the person comes up with a solution I would not have thought of if I was just trying to give advice. That is the value of coaching. So conversation, coaching, those can be 10-minute long strategies. You say, well, I don't have an extra 6 hours a week to invest in students. Do you have 10 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes? If you can spend 10 minutes with a student asking those kinds of questions, you can help that student move toward breakthroughs. But what if you don't have 10 minutes? What if you only have 10 seconds? I've got about 5 minutes left to share 11 ways to be a blessing in 10 seconds. Okay, so here we go. Number 1, listening skill. The second time this has come up. Tell me about what's important to you. You can say that in less than 10 seconds. Tell me about what's important to you. And if the student says, I really don't want to talk about it right now, but see, the question still is echoing in their head. My teacher cares about what is important to me. Second thing, give a blessing. Has anyone ever told you that you have the gift of such and such? Even with small children. I remember when one of my daughters was 4 years of age. We lived in a place where we lived up on a mountain, so thunderstorms would come over very rapidly, and it was pretty frightening when they would come over. I mean, it just seemed like instantly they were on you. So a thunderstorm was coming over. She ran into the house, slammed the door, and I looked at her. She was so frightened. I could see that she was, her lips were trembling, and she was about to cry. And I asked her, what's the matter? And she said, these were her words as a 4-year-old, if I were thunder, I would be quieter so as not to frighten people. And I said to her, has anybody ever told you that you have the gift of mercy? And she said, I don't even know what that means, Papa. So we sat down on the sofa and I said, having the gift of mercy means that you feel what other people feel. And not everybody is like that. And it's a special gift. that God has given to you to feel how people feel. Well, that shaped a lot of her life, especially during her adolescence. And it just started with a very brief conversation. Third is to affirm, here's something about you that makes a great deal of difference to me. Fourth, be transparent. I've made mistakes in my life, and I'd hate to see you go down that same path. Now, obviously, there's an age aspect to this. We have to be careful to not take our adult problems and put them on children, but there is a role, and it takes discernment, of course, but there is a role for sharing from our own life mistakes so that we can help others avoid those mistakes and grow. Fifth is to pray. I'm not sure what to do either. Can I pray with you about it? You can just pray right there on the spot. Sixth, to encourage. I know it's tough, but I believe you can do it. Most people don't think of that as encouragement, but look at the word. To encourage means to give courage to, not take responsibilities away from. I believe you can do it. Seventh is to teach. May I share with you, say for example, a scripture verse that has been important to me. May I share with you something that one of my teachers told me growing up. May I share with you a quotation that I heard from a pastor that I think might apply to your situation. You're asking for permission, but then you're sharing an applicable idea. For me, I put these scripture verses on everything. Every time I sign a piece of paper, almost, I'm putting a scripture verse on there. But I put scripture verses on cards, and I've given them to my children for years. I find them on their mirror, find them on their bulletin board, because there's something about writing the verse out and saying, I saw this verse, God brought you to mind, that really makes the difference. Eighth is to sponsor. I know someone who can help. Would you be interested in my putting you in touch with them? Let your network of the people you know help your students. And then three more, to admonish. This is from the Apostle Paul. You would obviously change the wording to what makes sense to you, but the Apostle Paul asked one of the churches that he was working with, you were running a good race. Who cut in on you? In other words, I'm not the enemy here. I'm walking beside you, helping you run a good race. And I am against anything that would stop you from running a good race. Number 10 is to love. No matter what, I'll be here. And then number 11 is to walk alongside. Let's go together. I encourage you to go back and read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and review the life of Christ. A friend of mine did this and pointed out a couple of things I thought were really interesting. Number one, Jesus asked 288 questions in the Gospels. Question asking is a huge part of how Jesus discipled others. Second thing is that some of these questions Jesus asked were really open-ended questions. It wasn't like he was the prosecutor and they were on, in the docket. He was asking them genuinely wide open questions. Like he asked the guy, he was in Jericho. He was a blind man in Jericho. And as he was there, the blind man, what was his name? Gosh, I can't believe I just skipped his. Bartimaeus. I was thinking I was about to say Barabbas, but that was the guy who got released. That would have been a different story. Yeah, Bartimaeus. So Bartimaeus is sitting by the side of the road. And he's saying, Jesus, heal me. Jesus comes up to him and says, what would you like for me to do for you? Don't you think that's hysterical? Because Jesus' disciples were like, he's blind. Jesus did not assume that the blind man wanted to see. There is a deep psychological truth in that. A lot of people who are sick don't want to be well. Because if they were to be well and their identity is attached to their sickness, then they would feel they cease to exist as a person who's relevant. Only when he said, I'm blind and I want to see, did Jesus heal him. Really powerful. Jesus also walked a lot with his disciples. Studies show that of the 3 years of earthly ministry Jesus had with his disciples, 13 months of it was spent walking from place to place all day, every day. When you walk alongside and you ask these questions, people get to know what's important to you, to know your heart, to begin to see what you see, to say what you would say, and to walk the way you would walk. And that's true discipleship.